Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm Jim Vrettos, your host for this show. The ancient Greeks had much to say about excellence. For Aristotle, it was an art form, won by training and habit. We don't act rightly because we have virtue or excellence, but we have it because we've acted rightly. Excellence is not an act, but a habit that we repeatedly do. The Greeks also referred to excellence as paideia, the rearing and education of the ideal member of the ancient Greek polis or state, who was a well-rounded Greek male, refined in intellect, morals, and physicality. Training of both the body and mind was important, and gymnastics and wrestling were valued alongside the moral education learned by the study of music, poetry, philosophy, arithmetic, and medicine. Our guest today on the Radical Imagination is Joanna Grover, who's a skilled practitioner, an executive board certified coach with 2 decades of experience as a cognitive behavioral therapist specializing in anxiety. She's co-authored a brilliant new book called The Choice Point, documenting a scientifically proven method to push past mental walls, overcoming our limited beliefs so we can achieve our goals of excellence and live our values. She's worked with the U.S. Department of Commerce, Olympic athletes, and C-suite executives. Joanna is a member of the International Coaching Federation and the Harvard Institute of Coaching. So welcome so very, very much, Joanna, to the Radical Imagination.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much for being here. And your book is very much about imagery. And of course, this show is entitled The Radical Imagination. So tell us a little bit about how you got into this work. Tell us about this concept of functional imagery technique, and get us started and give our audience a sense of what you're about, what this whole perspective is about.
Thank you for having me, Jim. I love any opportunity to talk about imagination is a welcome opportunity for me. So my journey in studying functional imagery training, which is the science behind the book, began with an equestrian accident where I had 2 decades as a cognitive behavioral therapist treating anxiety. And I had a bad equestrian accident where I shattered my shoulder. And it left me, with a bit of an identity crisis, like, who am I now if I'm not the athlete I believe I am? And how can I get my confidence back? And I had trained in so many different modalities, like hypnosis, obviously every form of CBT. And then I came across an article on functional imagery training, and I thought, that's it. Like, that's the missing link. If someone could teach me how to tap into my mind's eye, how to tap into my imagination, I knew I could get beyond this. So I ventured over to Plymouth. Actually, it wasn't at Plymouth. It was hosted outside of Plymouth in the UK. And in doing so, I became the first person in the United States to be trained in it. And then one of the developers said, would you seem to be a good writer and a good practitioner. Would you be interested in writing a book with me? So that's how the journey started.
And this is with Jonathan Rhodes.
Yes.
All right. And here's the book, by the way. The Choice Point. The Choice Point. Now, the choice point. What is the choice point? We make all kinds of choices throughout the day, and about life choices and media choices, long range choices. What is the choice point?
So we have so many choice points, as we know, but how do we manage them before they're upon us, right? So a choice point is that moment when you say you want to get up every morning and run because you're training for something, and it's raining and you think, I'd rather hit the snooze button, go back to bed. I'll start tomorrow. That's a choice point. And most of us in our choice points, we are just wired to go with what we've always done. We're wired to be on autopilot, take the safe path, the path that we know. So when you get to a choice point, what we teach is rather than being on autopilot, or even worse, when people are emotionally, like negatively emotionally responding at their choice point, like, what's it all mean anyway? I'm never going to do this.
Right.
We teach them to mentally rehearse that and to tie their imagery practice into their values. So when we get there, when we get there, they are more likely to react from a place of value-driven behavior that's linked to a goal. And we can talk about that in a moment. But
Yeah.
really, a lot of us are just making choices today that we, made the day before and the day before that. It's hard to break a pattern.
Let me just go back just for a minute here. So you said that most of us are on autopilot, or at worse, even self-destructive patterns. Why do you think so many people in this culture particularly, but perhaps others as well, I'm sure, are in this situation?
Yeah. Well, we are wired to think negatively, right? So we know from the Human Genome Project that we can look into your the neurons firing in your brain, and they've come to understand, these scientists, that we have this, roughly 80% of our thoughts are negative. Over 90% are the same as the day before. So we're wired to think negatively. We're wired to survive and be on high alert. But it doesn't serve us when we have a higher good, when we're trying to get somewhere different. It may serve us in a crisis in the moment and get our adrenaline going, but it doesn't serve the bigger purpose of humanity.
Interesting. Okay, now again, forgive me. I'm sociologically trained, so we push back a little bit here. I mean,
Yeah, please.
behavior is very, very complex, and it is a combination, I feel, of biological, sociocultural factors and determinants, and so on and so on. It's complicated. It's messy.
Yeah.
We're taught in sociological language. Even if someone has learned to think negatively, we can learn differently. That
Absolutely.
Differential association, and you try to get people to associate with people who reinforce that changed identity, and so on and so on. And social movements are very important in getting people to transform themselves. But again, you're starting with individuals here. I love the forward is by Martina Navratilova, the world famous tennis player, and she talks about imagining winning the match point. Imagine hitting great shots. Imagine getting the trophy, holding the trophy, kissing the trophy, lifting it over my head. But as you pointed out, she had that experience. She had won Wimbledon, but she also had a certain lack of confidence as well, which she points to again in the forward here to your book. And I'll just because I think this is really interesting and apropos of what you're saying. There was this writer, a famous tennis reporter, who once told me I had a hard time closing matches when I was serving for the match. I never told him this, but his words got stuck in my head for a while. His comment didn't always arise to me, but most times when I was serving for the match, that comment popped up and I had to fight it. Also, I had no idea what he said was true. Back then, we didn't have access to stats like today. I couldn't look it up and know if that was really a weak part of my game. I just had to wonder, and that was enough to lead to the occasional overthinking of a shot. This is why I tell athletes not to read things about themselves. I got through this mental block, and that's another term for it, is this mental block with action. We didn't have sports psychologists when I was competing. I wish we'd had the tools to reset into a positive space during a match. But we had, and she pays great compliments to you and your co-author. But we have those tools now, and the great thing is that they're currently sitting in your hands. Joe and Jonathan offer tools in this book that will reset your thinking, help you overcome adversity, and commit to finishing the goals that matter to you. So there in a nutshell, she is serving for the match, right? Serving for Wimbledon. And she's, preparing, and she is facing this block, perhaps, based on, wow, my ability to close the match is not as good as it used to be or should be. And here she is. So tell us.
Yeah, so I remember her sharing that story with me.
Yeah.
She never thought it was an issue, but then this reporter reported it was an issue. So she was like, is it an issue? Is it not an issue?
Right.
And what he had done, I don't believe intentionally, is he had planted a seed of doubt in her mind.
Right.
So it would come up, not every match, but it would come up every so often. Maybe if she was tired, if she was overthinking, it would just like pop into her, thought, one of the many thoughts she had. And then she'd be like, is it true? So I think we have to be very mindful of what we tell people, because we do kind of plant a seed. I think that we do have a neuroplasticity, which is, I think, what you were talking about before, the ability to adapt and change and overcome. But we also are constantly absorbing, especially if someone's a journalist, or we're like, oh, is that true? And then we start to maybe doubt. So it's a really interesting human story from a superhuman, right? Like one of the best players that's ever walked on the court. But we can see that even there's this ability to disrupt flow.
Exactly. And these dynamics occur within all of us in different parts of our life. And I was struck as you were talking about the way that these negative images or doubts get put into one's mind. I mean, again, children get this very early. So you're also dealing with people who have experienced perhaps these self-doubts, the negative labeling for decades. So how does this book help them break out of long-seated patterns and very very difficult patterns to break, whether it's addiction, whether it's responding to racism, sexism, etc.?
So I think the first thing it helps us realize is it creates awareness. Before I was a therapist, I was a community activist working in New York. And I think it begins, whether you're a community activist or you're a mental health professional, it begins with, like, back in the day, we would literally knock on the door and be like, are you aware that there's an incinerator going on proposed in this neighborhood? But as a therapist and as a coach, it's sort of giving them this awareness. Are you aware that you can control the channel in your mind? Or as I tell people, where you rest your mind, it's almost like putting a book on the shelf. Are you going to take it down and read it, or are you going to leave it there? So we help them to see that, they may have a bout of negative thinking, or they may have something after a bad performance that's stuck in their head, but we can help them reset that through imagery, which is the gateway to the imagination. So it's getting out of their head and into their senses, if you will.
So it's in part raising consciousness.
For sure.
Now, here comes the big question: raising consciousness toward what? And what are like I was in the opening there with the ancient Greeks, toward what are the values of excellence that we're trying to promote? And where do those values come from? Now, it's one thing to gain the knowledge, the awareness, to break through past patterns that were destructive. But again, isn't it about what are we attempting to do as we break through the overlying values that we're striving for? I can't. I'm not hesitating to ask you. Look, we've done this show for close to 10 years.
Mhm.
Every show I've had wonderful, wonderful people on, diverse fields and so on, but it's about raising a certain consciousness
Mhm.
and developing a radical imagination
Mhm.
towards certain underlying values, which we don't, transformative and spiritually and intellectually and so on, economically, sharing and being more cooperative. So where does that play into? How would you, if I worked with you and
Mhm.
our audience here, how would you help develop a radical imagination to break through? I'm saying this very seriously too,
Mhm.
to break through the enormous destructiveness
Mhm.
of of the larger society.
So there's a really simple answer to that question.
Okay.
You ready for it?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm ready.
It's it's tapping into the individual's motivation, right? Never imposing, as if I were to be your coach, I would never impose my values on you.
Mhm.
I would never impose my goals for you on you. It begins with really radical listening, which is like listening to understand rather than listening to respond and judge. And there is a form of counseling called motivational interviewing. So that is what we use. Motivational interviewing uses oars. Behind me is a rowing center because I'm a rower. So I love anything with oars. So it's open ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And once you get it right, it takes a little practice because you do more listening than talking. But once you get it right, it is the key to unlock somebody. And so, functional imagery training, which is the science behind the choice point, combines motivational interviewing with imagery. And that's like the sweet spot. If we just use imagery, we're not going to have sustained change. But when we combine motivational interviewing or MI with imagery, then we have tapped into human potential in an unbelievable way. And just to share with you, I received an email this week from a physician that we've trained, and think physicians don't have a lot of time with people these days. He's
Right.
a OBGYN surgeon, and he wrote this really ecstatic email saying, I have to share this with you and Jonathan. I had a patient come in August, and 5 minutes, it was 3 to 5 minutes of sort of MI and imagery. And she's come back this week and she's lost 13 pounds. He's like, I'm blown away. And she said the reason was their last conversation. So even in 5 minutes, even in a short space of time, we can have an impact on someone. And that to me is the beauty of our program.
No, I understand. I agree with you totally, and we try to do that on this show very much. We listen, and I very interested in making this a forum for people
Mm.
to learn and to be open people's minds and heads and hearts. Um, but I'm still drawn to the question of some overall value. I mean, you were talking before, you as a community organizer going around and, uh, you know, making people more aware of what was the open pollution that was going on in the building or something like that. Doesn't that lead us to other questions of, well, where did this pollution come from?
Mhm.
And what are the policies that have allowed this to happen and so on, and the enormous global and ecological devastation that
Mhm.
the overwhelming number of scientists have pointed out to, pointed to. And so where does that individual consciousness raising and listening to people where they're at and translate into action, not only individual action, but social action?
Sure. So I think that what we've seen is that it begins with an individual. So it begins with that individual feeling heard, feeling seen, feeling understood, knowing how to use their imagination to their advantage. And then they go off into the world, like this physician. And now he wants to be part of a community of physicians and practitioners who use this, right? So I think we're naturally social beings. We naturally want to gravitate to like-minded social beings. And once someone teaches us something, when I was a community activist, the rule was like, don't do for anybody what they can do for themselves, right? So this program is like that too. We're going to teach you how to use this, and then we're going to get out of the way and let you use it. And inevitably, people start to question other things. Like they may come to us, literally, we've had people come to us like wanting to work on their golf game or their tennis serve. And once they realize that they can use this tool for that, they're like, where else does it work?
Right.
Will it work? I think one of the most radical things that happened, again, it was someone who trained with us. And I had sort of put him on the spot in a meeting saying, would you mind sharing? It was a group of people who hadn't experienced our program, what you gained from this. And I'm thinking he's going to talk about his weight loss and exercise. And he said, the most important thing that I learned from this program is how to communicate with my wife. And it's changed everything. And we're all quite shocked. And I said, can you say more about that? And he said, I used to listen. He said, actually, I didn't even listen. I used to want to prove myself right. And he said, now I listen to understand. Right. And being right isn't even like part of the equation. And it's changed my relationship. So like, that's the beauty of it, because you understand we're always role modeling, right? So if I'm his coach and I'm listening to understand, that's different than anyone's probably ever listened to him. Mm-hmm. So he's like, what are you doing? I want to know more about it. And then he starts to practice it. And then his wife may say, what is this? I want to know more. So we send out these ripples of change.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. And it's a great, profound point that you really don't know where this is all going to lead. It can all take a variety of forms. And so when you said it starts with the individual, again, I agree. I also, believe very strongly that we grow up within institutions, mm-hmm. structural forms, cultures that impinge on us as well, mm-hmm. as individuals. And so there is this constant interaction, and some people have the opportunities and options much differently than others because of a variety of economic, political, social causes. But again, I think your point is that the choice point, which is a universal, wherever one might be. Mm-hmm. The point is that we all have the choice point at some point.
We all do. And I think that there's also, we get a lot of questions like, is this visualization or is this a vision board? I've done this before. And it's not, because what we know about imagery and the way we teach it is that it's more effective when you engage 3 or more senses. It creates a multi-sensory experience. It's more vivid, that's more real, that's more compelling for the human mind. So if I'm imagining a difficult conversation, or I'm imagining, defending my dissertation, I want it to be multisensory. What do I hear? What's the smell in the room? How does the temperature feel on my skin? I want to be in that moment in multisensory detail, because the more immersed I am, the more it's going to change the outcome. So that just like Martina Navratilova, by the time she got to Wimbledon, she had already won that trophy. You want to practice this so that before you're ever in that pressure cooker, you know how you're going to respond.
Right. That's really quite a point. You train to do this over and over and over again, like the ancient Greeks in the opening. And it's like Stephen Curry, right? They get to that next level. They're in the zone. Yes. And then, as I understand, what happens after the game, after he's, I don't know, whatever, sunk 20 3-pointers from 40 feet out, he spends another hour after the game shooting. And so he just reinforces the tremendous performance that he's just accomplished. Not that it's going to happen all the time and every time, but that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, but I don't want to exhaust people. They,
Right,
we
okay.
have to practice this all day long. We can drive ourselves a little nuts. But
Right.
as soon as we have a clear goal, whether it's to graduate from college, whether it's to it could literally be anything. We've had, you name it, we've worked with it. It could be being a better team player. It could be being a better public speaker. So whatever it is, you're going to develop a cue. Cues are a really important part of our work because many of us go off course because we're triggered, right? We're like, we're going to do something, but then we get triggered. Somebody triggers us, a sense triggers us, a smell, a taste, and we're hijacked by, immediate gratification. So cues we rehearse beforehand, like the imagery. So a cue might be, suppose you have a wedding ring and you turn that twice. That's your cue. It could be a deep breath. It's a physical thing that you do, ideally something that you bring with you every day, like your breath or like a ring or like touching your heart. And that, when you do it, for me, sometimes I'll touch my scar. When you do it, you've already queued up the imagery. So someone's triggered me, right? They said something in a meeting I didn't want to hear. I took it critically. I want to respond and, let them know how I feel about what they said. And maybe I don't have the best tone. Instead, I'll use my cue and I'll link my imagery to my values. I want to be a good team player. I want to support my family, whatever it is. And then I'll respond from that place. And we have seen time and time again that what this does is people make value-based decisions rather than instant gratification decisions. And I know you brought up climate change, and there's a huge opportunity for, individuals to have a collective difference.
Right. Okay. Well, but there are consequences to those collective differences, aren't there?
To the collective
Different-
give me an example?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I said, could you give me an example?
Well, there are climate change deniers and those who believe that we're past the point of no return, scientific evidence. So how do you deal with people who have made choices, evidently, to believe this or that narrative? Those are very contradictory narratives, and do we again, this is a scientifically proven method that you've developed here. What about people who deny much of what science has shown us to be true using the scientific method? There's conflict, right, over these values, and try as you might, there's going to be this conflict. I can understand trying to organize people in communities and as teams and as a country, as a nation. We are, as I don't have to tell you, so polarized as a people. And what holds us together? What is the sort of narrative? What is the sort of choices that we want people to be aware of so that we can live in a democracy that we all presumably want and love?
Okay, so that's a big question, right? But again, adhering to the model, we're never going to tell someone what to do or what to, how they should use this, because then we're getting into extrinsic and not intrinsic motivation, and then it's not sustainable. So we really want to tap into the why. Like, why do I want to do this thing? Or why do I not believe? And we're really listening to understand, again, not to judge. And in that space of being understood, it's really quite amazing what can happen. I grew up in a very I grew up in Nassau County on Long Island.
Mhm.
And I remember my community activist friend said, "You'll never, that is such a Republican stronghold, you'll never tackle environmental issues." So I thought, well, maybe if I start like a waterfront cleanup organization, right? Just like who can be against a beach cleanup? And I got a local boat dealer who was my dad to donate a boat, and we took people out, and they might have not believed, and we didn't talk about beliefs like that. I mean, this was 30 years ago, so people weren't really talking about climate change as much as they are now. But I can tell you that that group, and that summer I recruited 700 people to help.
Hmm.
A very conservative community. And
Yeah.
that group went on to do things that were amazing. They've started 7 other chapters. They've attacked pollution at the source. They've rerouted. They've created catch basins around storm drains. They have become real environmentalists. But we said to start small, and we didn't start with a lecture. It was like we started with a question: would you like to help? I actually said, "Do you want to go for a boat ride? And you're going to have to pick up some garbage. Is that okay?" So I think it's finding common ground, right? I think that's what it is. And with our book, we've heard from, really very progressive. Like I recently was at an event with Jane Fonda, and Assemblywoman Seabright came up and said, like, "I love your book. It's incredible." And then I've had like a member of the like NRA who is also evangelical reach out and say, "I love your book. It's incredible." It's available to whomever wants to use it. And I've had conversations with both individuals, and I believe that their intentions are, they do believe they're doing the right thing. But I think as they start this challenging their internal chatter, there will be a transformation, and they'll be more likely to be able to somehow work together. That's our hope. That's our
Yeah.
hope that we can. My co-author and I, we had a lot of difficult conversations during the writing of this book, because he's a applied psychologist, and he writes theory, and he writes for journals, for research papers. And to me, that was like the cure for insomnia. And I'm a storyteller. I want to tell stories. So we'd have this back and forth. And our book is really the blending of science and storytelling. So, and we had to use imagery along the way. We had to really focus on our goal of what will it feel like when we're done? How can we not get, lost in this argument about how we're going to write this chapter, but how can we see like the big picture? So I think, again, it comes back to just suspending judgment while we kind of listen to understand.
I agree with you totally. It's a beautiful melding your book of science and imagination.
Mhm.
And no, I agree. I think you get nowhere, whether it's right, left, whatever, some dominant ideology being imposed on people
Mhm.
and saying this is the way things are, and that. But we've talked by phone a little about the work of James Gilligan, for example,
Mhm.
right? And his work in prisons, where
Mhm.
he, many decades ago, started by, again, listening the to people who were never listened to before, their
Mhm.
narratives, and allowing things to come out. And of course, what he found was that invariably the most violent of people there in those prisons, Massachusetts prison system, uh, were abused horribly themselves. So they never had a chance for that to come out and to be dealt with, and they wanted to talk so very, very much about this. So again, you never know what that leads to, but that's the start. I agree with you totally on that.
Yeah, I think that so much can come from human conversation.
Yeah.
I remember a beautiful story I heard on NPR years ago. It was a jazz musician who was playing in a club outside of Atlanta, and there was a Klan member coming, and so his friends were like, they wanted to kick this guy out. They wanted to call him out. They wanted to, and this jazz musician who was Black said, no, like, I'm curious about why he's a member of the Klan, and I'd like to get to know him, which his friends gave him a lot of flack about, like, why would you want to do that? So in the course of this story that he told, they talked about music, he and the leader of the Ku Klux Klan in that area. And in talking about music and in going to one another's homes, they transcended like the Klan member, what happened is he eventually hung up his robe. And in hanging up his robe, the whole Klan in that area dissipated. There was no more in that county. So there were no weapons involved. There were no harsh words exchanged. It was two humans coming together about music, and obviously unbelievable patience and understanding among this musician. But it was a story that stayed with me. Like, if you can transcend, hate, if you can transcend the other in the story and connect as humans, when possible, it's not always, possible, but when possible, it can open like such doors of understanding, and it may lead to something radical happening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As you were talking, my mind went to, again, the devastation, the destructiveness that's going on in the Middle East. And again, we're all basically human beings with similar needs and desires and passion and so on. And, one of our friends was one of the leaders of Peace Now there. She's been taken hostage, Vivian Silver. So you have people working with people on so many different levels, and that still may not be enough because of the degree of hatred and destructiveness that has existed historically. But we've got to break the pattern, and I think that's what your book is so much about, and I applaud it so much. I really think it's...
Thank you. I think that there's if we start with, I know it's used a lot, but that Viktor Frankl quote from Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote from a concentration camp, when you create a space between stimulus and response, you can find in that space your freedom. Those weren't his exact words, but that's what we found. If you can create a space between, like, I'm triggered, I'm going to respond with rage, I'm going to respond with retaliation. If you can create a little bit more space, you can actually find freedom in that. Freedom from binary thinking, freedom from, in Buddhism, it's freedom from suffering. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. This is, black, this is white. This is all the root of human suffering in Buddhism. So if we can create a little bit more space there for a middle way, for seeing a slightly different thing than what you've seen before, there's incredible potential for understanding.
Absolutely. Freedom from our fears.
Yes.
And fear of the other and so on.
Yes.
So tell me a little how this book has been responded to by so many people in industry and sports, everyday Americans and so on, and touch a little bit on the scientific research that's gone into this.
Sure. So I think if you look at the back cover, you'll see the response. Like, I love the variety. It's like, it ranges from, astronauts to members of the military and Fran Drescher, right? So right. It's a broad, and then of course there's an incredible athlete who's like broken 10 world records. So there's a real range in endorsements, which I love. We're not just like a business book or a self-help book. We cross so many sectors. And the science behind it actually was born out of addiction, and looking at why well-intentioned people set out to give something up, like, let's say, alcohol. And And they knew that, that if they didn't give it up, that it was going to impact their health and all that. Like the consequences were great, right? And they'd leave the counselor's office and be fully committed to give something up. But then they would have a craving, and cravings are sensory based, right? I smell something, I hear something, I hear ice clinging against a glass, and suddenly this craving has hijacked my executive thinking. So they set out, these researchers at Plymouth University in the UK, Jackie Andrade was one of them, to say, like, can we teach people? Can we use this science of craving and essentially teach people to crave what they desire? So when in the throes of, I'm going to respond this way, they can change the channel. And it resulted first in the theory of elaborative intrusion, which is what we elaborate on. Like, we all have these intrusive thoughts that come and go. And I'm not talking about intrusive thoughts like OCD, that's a whole separate entity, but intrusive thoughts like you're in the middle of writing a paper and suddenly you want a chocolate chip cookie. That's an intrusive thought. The more I elaborate on that cookie, what it'll smell like, where I'll be when I'll have it, what it'll taste like. And so the more I elaborate on it in detail using multisensory imagery, the more I'm likely to be headed to the fridge or down to the corner to get that chocolate chip cookie. So they took this theory and they then developed it into functional imagery training, teaching people how to use imagery to shape their behavior. And so there's 2 decades of research behind it. And in the more recent studies, it's proven to be 5 times more effective than motivational interviewing, which is a really highly effective, as I said, it's a highly effective way of tapping into someone's motivation. So when you have just motivational interviewing, and then you have motivational interviewing plus imagery, the results are 5 times higher. People are 5 times more likely to succeed in the face of great odds than if you just give them straightforward motivational interviewing. So the results are pretty powerful, like 5 times, and that's held up in military scenarios. It's held up when weight loss and exercise. So it seems to be this, there's a bit of magic when we combine MI and imagery.
And your skills as a cognitive behavioral therapist, that's part of it as well.
Well, I think that's taught me to appreciate science and appreciate someone's ability to change. But my frustration with CBT was that a lot of people wouldn't change long term. They'd need to keep coming back, or can I have a tune-up, or my anxiety's back. What we found with FIT is that people get it, and then they don't really need us. It's kind of fascinating. Like, maybe every now and then they'll say, "Can I have a session?" But once they get it, they always have it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So people typically go to see you, work with you for how long? For how many sessions? Or
on average, 6 sessions.
6.
Mm-hmm. Some people want a few more, but in 6 sessions we can, or as you heard with the doctor, in 5 minutes he had a breakthrough. But in terms of people learning, their what their goal is it really their goal? Because sometimes people will come with a goal, and as they really explore it in that first session, they realize that isn't their goal at all. So once they're clear on a goal, and we start to use imagery, 6 sessions.
I see. So this is not Sigmund Freud here, or what would you say about more of that long-term?
I think that's wonderful if you have the time, the money. Like, there's nothing wrong. I'm in Miami, and Miami has a big analyst population. There are a number of analysts here who don't believe in CBT as being effective, and that's fine. I think there's room for everyone. But I found that this is if you're looking for something effective and efficient, I think this is it.
Tell me why you think, why are these analysts, against it? I mean, what's their?
Well, I think I think anytime like someone comes in, if you're going to spend years on an issue, years and years, and 3 days a week, and somebody comes in and says, I can change their behavior in 6 sessions, they're going to be offended.
Yeah, well, I think there's room enough for all kinds of perspectives and so on. So tell me about really traumatized people. You dealt with sexual abuse victims and so on. I mean, deeply traumatized people. This can also work with a wide variety of people with a wide variety of emotional issues and difficulties.
Well, we haven't, I've worked with people. I've worked with, when I was at NYU, I worked with parents accused of abuse and neglect. I worked with their kids. I wouldn't say that we're at the point where we can say this program can help with trauma. I believe that we will get there. There are studies being done. There are people who've used it successfully. But trauma is so imagery based that I think whoever is doing it has to be really trained in trauma. They have to have that solid basis. So we're just beginning to like study it in the use of trauma. But for now, I would sort of steer away from it, even though I've worked with trauma in the past. I don't use functional imagery training for trauma.
Right, because you're really then getting back to having that person relive certain periods to deal with it.
You could, and certainly anyone who's had trauma, like I never want to ask them to close their eyes because that feels unsafe. We always, and we don't know if someone's had trauma, right? A lot of times they don't disclose. So whenever we ask someone to go into imagery mode, we say you can leave your eyes open or you can close your eyes, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Now you've set up an institute or
well, we have an online school.
Online school. Tell us about that.
And so that is, it's in its infancy. We've just begun because it was hard to get it right. We kept saying we'll have it out this summer, and then we'll have it out. So we launched last month, and we offer courses that are that give you continuing ed credits if you're a member of a number of organizations, including like the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches, International Coaching Federation. And we have membership abroad as well because it's global. So we're really, we're putting that out there. We will do next year a live training. And we're always like, we meet monthly with our graduates or more often if they need supervision. We're really, we're hoping to bring this work to a larger base of people. And we when we do trainings also, we always set aside like 10% for scholarships, and we try to make it affordable for folks.
Right. And so this is a 6-month program. Are there interns?
So right now
you get some sort of certification? Or?
We're not certifying, but we are. So online, they can take 2 different courses that have like 4 and 5 hours of continuing ed credits. And then we will do a live, live where people get to practice in 2024. So we're not, certifying is a whole issue because then you have to recertify, and we don't have the team yet. Eventually we will. But right now, it's really like intro and coursework, and then some work with us individually.
Right, and like certainly, absolutely, could see this becoming part of a social work curriculum. I mean, psychology departments and so on, and of course, you know how the academic world works very slowly, but still.
That's what we're looking for, because we don't really want to be, we want to be a program, not a school. And we're looking for partners who are schools, because they have the team, they have the structure to do this in a way that we don't.
Right. and also work with colleagues in an integrative way, which I think you're open to.
Totally.
Right. And I think that's because it's interesting. We're trying to do the same thing with our Jim Gilligan and I and Bandy and Lee and so on with our Institute for Prevention of Violence. We want them, this has to be an integrative approach. And there's got to be colleagues, and we've got to all work together. We can't be in our little silos here forever and ever. So it sounds wonderful, Joanna. There's a lot of plans in the working, and you know, it's worked for you.
It has.
It has. That's the bottom line. It works, right? We're Americans here. We want things that work. We're pragmatic, okay? We want theory and ideas, certainly, and imagination. But okay, let's fix things. Let's get it done.
Yes, and just to give you a quick story, my mom is probably the biggest skeptic I know. Right? She's always like, I don't know about that. You know, I don't necessarily believe that. So I was with her in the hospital. She had COVID, and this was a year and a half ago. And you know, she's 89 at the time and really having trouble breathing. I was the only one allowed in to see her because I had brought her in. She was in quarantine. Her blood pressure was spiking, and she was really in high panic mode. So I said, Mom, do you want to experience what I do? Like, do you want to try it? And at that point, she was desperate, and she said, okay. And I put her in an imagery mode. I said, you're in your garden. She loves her garden. Picking your tomatoes. You can hear the sound of picking the tomatoes. You're holding them in your hand. There's the warm sun on your skin. You can hear Dad in the background laughing. And it was literally a minute. And I said, open your eyes. And do you see how your blood pressure, the machine had been beeping before, and how your blood pressure dropped, and how do you feel? And she said, and again, this is like my biggest critic. She said, you have to do this in every hospital. Like there are so many people suffering. You have to teach this. So that's part of my journey too, because it's not just worked on me. It's worked on my mom. It's worked on my dad. It's worked on like so many people that are near and dear to me. It hasn't worked on my dog who's behind me begging for a treat.
All right. Well,
another story.
Well, you know what? It's working on me. I was imagining those tomatoes. We're going to go out to the country in a couple of days, and it's the last, the last go round. Anyway, no, not kidding here, but no, it's what you've got here are just incredible. It's an incredible program, and I really admire you so very, very much. And it's I just need to ask you in the few seconds that we have left. You're back on the horse now.
Yeah. So I went back on the horse, and because I was determined that I was going to back on the horse, and I did a few shows, and I had decided I wanted to end on a high note. Like to me, I had, the risk didn't. It was no longer worth it. So I gave
on your terms. It was on your terms this time.
Yes, on my terms. So I gave up riding and took up rowing. So I live right next to my rowing club, and it's a very graceful sport. It's like meditation on the water, and I have, it's amazing. Like I had really pledged that I wasn't going to have pain in that shoulder, and knock on wood, no pain.
It's the last second we have. Everyone, please get this book.
Oh, thank you.
And tell us how to get a hold of you.
Sure. So they can order it online. They can order it, Barnes and Noble. They can, if they are an Amazon person, they can order it on Amazon. There are so many ways that they can go to their local library and ask them to get it. They can listen to it on Audible. They can get it on Kindle. They can ask their local bookstore to order it. I've had friends do that. So wherever you shop, I promise you, they can get it for you.
Make the choice to get the choice point. Thank you, Joanna, so very much. I look forward very much to meeting with you in person.
Oh, I do as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so very, very much. And thank you all for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again on The Radical Imagination next week.